Well, welcome to the greenhouse slash studio. This is where the Eclectic Monk happens, and trying a little something different tonight. I'm actually going to record my podcast and video record the podcast. And so this will be podcast number 33, but video podcast number 1. And obviously, since I'm videoing this, you will get to see all of the things that I have to do to actually record the podcast and the way I do it. And of course, I can edit the video a little bit so that there's not a lot of dead time in the middle of it, so you don't get completely bored stupid. But I thought it might be interesting for people to actually see how the production of the podcast happens. And so I am recording the podcast on my cell phone right here using the Anchor app with all of the tools that you need to make a podcast right on your phone. And I can do everything that I do right on the phone. I can also use my laptop and do video recording, audio recording that way, import it, create MP3s, download it into the app and all that. But it's a lot simpler just to record straight to the phone. So I'm going to record straight to the phone. I'll also be recording straight to the camera. Hopefully the audio is okay, and we'll see what happens as this unwinds. So welcome to video podcast number 1. All 9 of you, I'm glad you're here. Appreciate you hanging out with me as I record the Eclectic Monk, episode number 33. So, let's go. First thing we have to do, I usually begin each podcast with a little bit of an intro, a little short intro. There'll be a 5-second countdown. That's so that the intro music can play. That's just what I do. You don't have to do that if you're doing your own podcast. You can do whatever you want to do. That's just the way I do it. So, here we go. Let's start with the intro, episode number 33. So it's no secret that I love Star Trek. Star Trek is dear to my heart. It has been since I was a kid. I was there in 1966 when it happened. I remember as a very young child actually going to my Uncle Larry's house so we could watch Star Trek on a color television set. So I have real memories of Star Trek etched in there. There's something that happened after 1969, after Star Trek was canceled after only 79 episodes. There was a wide gulf of time that had no Star Trek, except there was Star Trek in the written form. So tonight, on this episode of the Eclectic Monk, I want to share with you my favorite Star Trek book of all time and why those books were so important to me. Stick around. I think you'll find it kind of interesting. Be right back. Okay, so I've recorded the intro. I'm going to add the background music, and I'm going to save this. Put it in as Star Trek intro, add that to the recording. I'm not ready to publish yet, and it will take that just a second to process. So gotta wait for the intro to process. This could be one of the things that I edit out of the video. It's not hard to edit things out of the video, but we'll see. It might be interesting. The idea of this, again, I do love Star Trek, and there's so many cool things that I could do a podcast about, but it's hard. It was challenging for me, and so I landed on this idea for the first Star Trek podcast, episode 33, which is just amazing to me. So I have processed. We're ready to go with the next segment. Usually I will again give about a 5-second delay to allow time for the music to play. I use a little clip called Celtic. It's actually something I recorded right off of a CD that I have here in the greenhouse. I just recorded on my phone. I use it. I couldn't tell you what it is. It's a jig of some kind, traditional Celtic music. I like it. It fits me. So anyway, here we go. Segment number 1 of my favorite Star Trek book. Here we go. I love Star Trek, like I said before. And there was this period of time that, if you were alive when I was, Star Trek didn't happen. It was canceled in 1969 after only 79 episodes. A few years after that, there was a very short-run animated series that lasted, I think, 1 season. And that was it. After that, there was no Star Trek. There was rumors of a second television program. There were always rumors of a movie that might be happening, but there was really nothing that was going on. So somewhere would have had to be around 1975, 74, 75. I was 11, 12 years old. And my mom walked in with a bag of books that had the covers ripped off of them. See, back in the day, and they may still do this today, if books sit in the bookstore and don't sell, then the bookstore owner can rip the covers off, send them back into the publisher for credit, and then they just dispose of the books because they're no good for anything. Now I'm sure they would, chop them up, recycle them, and use them for paper cups or toilet paper or something. But back in the day, they would just throw them away. And somehow or another, my mom came up with this bag of books with no covers. And one of those books was a book called Spock Must Die. Spock Must Die by James Blish. This was the first book published. It was actually published in 1970, and it was the first book published that was Star Trek, but never an episode on television. Now, starting in 1967, James Blish had been doing a series of adaptations on the scripts. So he took all of the scripts. There are actually 12 volumes of Star Trek adapted by James Blish, and it's actually the television scripts that he took. James Blish, well-known science fiction author, and then he took them and put them into narrative form. So reading these was like reading the television show. They were episodes from the show. But Spock Must Die, my coverless book, was the first book that came out in 1970 that did not ever see air. Written by James Blish, who had been writing these script adaptations for several years. So, and I loved it. And suddenly, I had this book that was Star Trek, but it wasn't anything I'd ever read before. And I discovered there in 1970 that Bantam Books, so it's a paperback book publisher, had begun publishing a series of Star Trek novels. And the very best one that they published, and I believe might have been the first one that they published, was a book called Star Trek The New Voyages. Star Trek The New Voyages. This is a reissue, so the cover is wrong. The original cover was much different. It didn't even have the Enterprise on it. It was a spaceship on the front because they didn't have the rights from Paramount to use the image of the Enterprise on the cover of the book. Isn't that crazy? But Star Trek The New Voyages came out. It was originally published in, I believe, 76. Originally published in 76. And so that would have been, again, 7 years after Star Trek had gone off the air. The animated series had come and gone, and there was just this huge gulf of no Star Trek. Now, the reason I love Star Trek, I mean, besides the fact that it was, just fun science fiction growing up as a kid. And again, it went into syndication when I was very young. Used to catch it on, Channel 17 late at night. We would watch the episodes. I think I've seen all 79 of them. I do have my favorite episodes. I have my least favorite episodes, and I have episodes that, while I don't think they may be great television, were important messages. I have some that were not really good Star Trek stories, but really good television. There's all kind of things about that original series of Star Trek that I admire and I enjoy. And obviously the characters were great. Now, I know everybody says, William Shatner, his acting is over the top. Leonard Nimoy, who is he? Besides Spock, he never did anything, although that's not true. DeForest Kelley is Dr. McCoy. Great character. What did he do? He's actually from Atlanta, where I'm from, and was in a lot of westerns back in the 50s. So DeForest Kelley was really an important actor in his own time. So all of these guys who are in this series were really good actors. They brought those characters to life. And in the first season and the second season, but the first season especially, the writing was incredible. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the show, actually was doing most of the writing. They would send in their screenplays, and then he would take them and rework them to make sure that the characters were right. And that's why you have this really, really strong character development in that first series, the first season. So Star Trek is just, to me, such a great show and a great idea. And it's been, of course, all the iterations, Next Generation and Voyager and Deep Space Nine and Enterprise were all great. All of the films were good in their own right, some better than others, obviously. There was the J.J. Abrams reboot, which was great. And then today, of course, you have the new Star Trek that's out there on the CBS streaming service, Picard, and Star Trek Beyond or something. I haven't really watched that one because I don't want to pay CBS money just to be able to stream a Star Trek show. I think that's stupid. But I'm old. What do I know? And nothing that's ever been done touches that original 79 episodes released between 1966 and 1969. They were so topical, they were so outlandish, they were so colorful, they were so fun. And I just love Star Trek. And I was so excited when I discovered that there was Star Trek out there. There was Star Trek to be found, Star Trek to be enjoyed. And so I want to share with you, again, Star Trek, The New Voyages, and just tell you why I love this book. I read this book at least once a year, and I'll explain it all when we come back. Stick with me. It gets more interesting than it's already been. So, that's my second piece. I'm going to add my music here. I'm going to save this. Star Trek 1, add to recording. There we go. One of the things you might have noticed is that there's actually some writing on this Star Trek 1. It says Gossard on there. So, Miss Gossard, if you're out there, I stole your book. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I was in 8th grade. My parents were going through a divorce. My world was being turned upside down. And you had this book in your book of, here, when you get done with your work, read a book and shut up and leave me alone pile. And I took it and I kept it. And I'm really, really sorry. I feel terrible that I did that. And yet, all these years later, I'm so glad that I did, because every time I pull out this book, I remember you, and I especially remember the way that you were so kind to me when you found out that my parents were going through a divorce, and you really, really made a difference. So if by some wild chance you ever see this podcast, please know that I really, really love you. I appreciate you, and I have your book. Sorry, you can't have it back. So there you go. We're still processing. This should be done in just a second. And that's right. This is what I do. I sit here in my greenhouse and I record these things and then I publish them. And this is also where I do artwork. I have my art supplies out here. It's where I record. I've got my laptop. I can bring my guitar and a mandolin and got my harmonicas, whatever out here. I can do my basic recordings. I take them all inside to my desktop to mix them down. But this is my place in the world where I come and hang out. And so, wow, this thing is still processing and I'm running out of things to say. I will probably edit a good bit of this, just so you know, in case you never see it. Segment 2 is coming up, as I actually go through the book itself and talk about the stories in this wonderful book that you should read, Star Trek: The New Voyages. It's a great one. So here we go, The Eclectic Monk, Segment 2, Episode 33. So Star Trek: The New Voyages is a really fascinating book. It's actually fan fiction. The stories, it's a collection of short stories that are written by fans in what they call fanzines. And the editors of the book went out, found what they thought were the very best fan fiction, and they paid for them and collected them into this book. It's got a foreword by Gene Roddenberry, and each story is actually introduced by a different one of the members of the cast. So Leonard Nimoy, Nichelle Nichols, James Doohan, Majel Barrett Roddenberry, George Takei, and then we have DeForest Kelley and William Shatner actually all coming in and introducing these short stories. And so that's kind of fun to read them. And again, this is published in 1976. So in 1976, the whole Star Trek convention thing is just really beginning to happen. Everybody's beginning to understand what a cultural impact Star Trek had had. And so this was a fun time, and it's a great piece of Star Trek history to read these introductions and to see what they were saying. Anyway, it's a great book. The first story is a story called Nivar, introduced by Leonard Nimoy. In that story, Mr. Spock is taken and is separated into his human half and his Vulcan half, and all of the things that happen in that process of reintegrating. It's based a lot on the story of The Enemy Within, where Kirk is split like that, where you have the good Kirk and the bad Kirk. I remember he tries to rape his Yeoman Rand, that was her name. So that was an interesting episode, and this one kind of makes a lot of reference to that. Really good story. James Doohan introduces the next story. It's called Intersection Point, and this one, the Enterprise runs into a temporal disturbance, and they lose a major part of their engine. It kind of goes into this white space that's there. They can't move, and so they have to send somebody in to try to find this piece. He gets in, his mind is scrambled by the things that happen, and then turns in that our universe and an alternate universe have intersected at this point, and the reality in that other universe is so different that we can't understand it. It's a really cool piece of science fiction. It's very hard fiction. It's all about the technology of Star Trek, and so it makes it really, really interesting. The next one is The Enchanted Pool. That one is introduced by Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura on the show. And in this one, Mr. Spock, there's a weapon, this super weapon that's missing. The Klingons are trying to get this weapon, and so Mr. Spock actually takes a shuttlecraft down, trying to find this landing party from another Star Trek, another universe, another ship, not the Enterprise, but another Federation ship has got this thing, and he goes down, and he gets there, and this nymph comes out and begins trying to seduce him. That's a really, really interesting story that's got a really cool twist for an ending. I'm not going to give it away because you should read this book and you should read the story and enjoy it. There was apparently a lot of fan fiction at the time that was built around Mr. Spock's sexuality. This very calm, collected, logical person apparently drove the women crazy, and so the ladies would write these steamy stories about, you know, getting on with Mr. Spock. This is not one of those, but it kind of has those overtones, so it's interesting. The next story is introduced by Majel Barrett Roddenberry. Majel Barrett, of course, played Nurse Chapel in the series. She also played number 1 in the first pilot called The Cage. That one was split into 2 parts. It was the 2-parter that came out in the middle of the first season when they basically desperately needed a script. They needed something to fill in that production was behind, and so they went in and they come up with a 2-part episode by taking the original pilot that was never shown, never released, chopping it up and just kind of recording a little bit of filler around that and not wasting that film. So, but The Cage was a very interesting take on Star Trek. It was Roddenberry's first try at it. And as far as I know, Star Trek is the only television show that ever had one pilot, a lot of money poured into it, that the network said, we don't really get it, but we kind of like the concept, so here's some more money, go do it again. And they went and did it again. And so they had this, the next pilot, Jeffrey Hunter had left by that time. William Shatner comes in as Captain Kirk. It's called Where No Man Has Gone Before. It's a great episode, but they took that, The Cage, and they used that in the 2-parter called The Menagerie. So, pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, and then Majel Barrett married Gene Roddenberry. That's where the Roddenberry comes from. And she introduces this story, Visit to a Weird Planet Revisited. And that's kind of fascinating because the whole gist of this story is that Bill Shatner and James Doohan and Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley are shooting an episode of Star Trek, step up onto the transporter, and they find themselves actually transported to the Starship Enterprise. It's paying homage to another fan story called A Visit to a Weird Planet, where Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy and Mr. Spock and Mr. Scott get into the transporter, find themselves on a television set in the 1960s. So I've never read that story. I would love to, but the story is actually delightful. It's a lot of fun, and it's one that you definitely need to read, so you should do that. The next one, introduced by George Takei, is called The Face on the Barroom Floor. It's a shore leave story. Mr. Sulu and Captain Kirk go down to this planet, kind of a Wild West planet, and shenanigans happen, a lot of fun things go on, and we get to explore the human side of James T. Kirk as he goes and blows off a little steam and finds himself in real trouble because he loses his communicator. So don't miss that story, it's a good one. DeForest, let's see, Sonia Marshak and Myrna Culbreth, who are the editors of this book, they were actually the ladies who started, they put on the first Star Trek convention, so they are very integral in Star Trek pop culture. Sandra Marshak, Myrna Culbreth, and they introduced The Hunting, and this is one where McCoy and Spock beam down to this planet. Spock is trying to go through some Vulcan ritual. He has to go and mind meld with a saber-toothed tiger kind of thing, and craziness happens, and it's a really good Dr. McCoy story as McCoy has to deal with the crazy things that are going on with Spock. Anyway, really cool story, you'll like it. The next one is DeForest Kelley. Dr. McCoy introduces The Winged Dreamers, and The Winged Dreamers it's just delightful. It's a fantastic story. There's a really cool twist to it, and it reminds me of Shore Leave, the episode Shore Leave. They're down on a planet and strange things are happening, and it's the least likely suspect is actually the culprit and the reason for all the problems. So I won't give it away. Again, you have to read the story, but it is a really, really neat story. The last one, introduced by William Shatner, is called Mind Sifter. In this one, Shatner, the Klingons are trying to learn the secret of the Guardian of Forever. If you know anything about Star Trek, the Guardian of Forever is the big donut thing that McCoy gets back, and then Kirk and Spock have to go back in time, and Edith Keeler gets killed. It's the City on the Edge of Forever, the episode, which is considered by most and really everyone to be the very best Star Trek episode ever produced. So the Klingons are trying to figure out what's going on with that. They take Kirk, they use this thing called the Mind Sifter. It's a torture device. They're trying to get information out of him. They basically just break his brain, and then he escapes somehow, jumps into the Guardian of Forever, disappears back into the past, and then he's in a mental ward somewhere in the United States back in the 40s or 50s or something, and Spock and McCoy are trying to figure out where he's at. It's a really, really gritty story. It's one of those that, as you read it, it's uncomfortable. It ends fine. It's, again, not canon in any way. So it didn't really happen in the Star Trek universe. But it's a really, really interesting story, and it's interesting to see what can be done with these characters if somebody just has the idea and the liberty to do it. And so that is Star Trek: The New Voyages. Again, Bantam put out, I think there's about 15 Bantam books, and then another publisher took over. As far as I know, there's probably 150, 200 Star Trek books out there. They're everywhere. There's all kind of books. Some of them are great, some of them are terrible. I will go through all the Bantam books at some time and just give you a rating, what I think of them. I will commit to read them all again, because there's some of them I haven't read in a long time, because quite frankly, the first time I read them I thought they were awful. So I'll try some of them again. Some of them are actually interesting, some of them are disturbing, and some of them are great. So we'll do that at some future time. But luckily there was a movie called Star Wars that was going to come out in 1977, 1978. Star Trek the Motion Picture is going to come around, and even though it was not the best film, it led to Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which is a fantastic movie, and everything that happened after that. So Star Trek was not dead, but there was that period of time between the show, the animated show, which was very short-lived, but award-winning. It won an Emmy, actually, and the movies, where there was this incredible written Star Trek that was going on, these great books that were happening. They were a lot of fun. And Star Trek: The New Voyages is the best of them, of all of them that I've ever read. I love this book. I encourage you, find you a copy. You can probably go on Alibris or Amazon, get one for a couple of bucks. Can't imagine that it's terribly expensive. So I've never paid more than a couple of bucks for one at a used bookstore. If I find them, I buy them just because I give them away. I like them that much. Anyway, that is The Eclectic Monk, the first Star Trek episode that I have done. My favorite Star Trek book. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you'll go out and find this book, or find some Star Trek books, enjoy it. If you don't like Star Trek, well, I'm sorry. You need to go back and try again, because it really is great. And there's so much to explore in it. I could do nothing but a Star Trek podcast probably for the rest of my life, and we wouldn't get through all of it, but I won't do that to you. Anyway, I appreciate you. Again, I do have the stickers are in, so I'll show you those. There's the stickers, they're in. I have those. If you're interested in that, please go to my website, www.theeclecticmonk.com, and you'll go in. You can reach out to me through email, give me an address. I will mail you one of these. A couple of them, actually. I got 1,000, so I can afford to throw a couple your way. And I will be glad also, for my first 9 people who request a sticker, I will send you along something that's also unique, personal, and special. So I encourage you and invite you to do that. And so that is the episode. Until we meet again, fellow travelers, travel well. And all 9 of you, I hope you have a great day, live long, and prosper. Till we meet again, God bless you. Have a great day. We're going to save that. Star Trek 2. And the rest of this is simply me going in, adding a couple little bits and pieces, publishing it, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to bore you with those details, but I encourage you, if you're watching this, means that you listen to the podcast. I will throw out that there is a video podcast in my outro, so people will know that that's happening. And again, I really, really appreciate you. Please go to the website. You probably found the video through the website, or you're one of my YouTube followers. Go to the website, www.theeclecticmonk.com, and send me just a contact, reach out, give me your name, your email address. If you want a sticker, give me your mailing address, and I will, if you're one of the first 9, I will send you something unique and something just for you. So, till we see each other again, thanks so much for joining me. God bless, and have a great night. See you again.